I was a production assistant for a couple of years, and I finally decided that instead of making everybody else look good at their job, I wanted to do their job. I wanted to be a photojournalist. And I was scared, and I thought about it for a long time, and I decided, well, Leanne Patchen, who, she was leaving the station, and I went to Marty, and I said, I would like to shoot news. But the photographers at that time were not excited about me being on the staff. They felt like I was taking the job of somebody who was more qualified, a male. It took me, I would say it took me about a year and a half to where I felt like me. It became, this is what I do. This is who I am. This is my vision. And once that happened, I just became in love with, photojournalism. You have to become the painter. You have to become the sculptor. You have to think about these images that are in front of you and how to frame them and how to use them in a way that gives some emotion to the story. Sometimes there's a tremendous amount of emotion when you walk in somewhere.
How do you relate death? How do you relate somebody laying on the ground with their guts blown out?
And there are people crying.
I don't know if it makes me bad.
And people, have had terrible things happen to them.
First time I was in Vietnam, an entire squad of people in front of me got backed up over by an APC, and I had to learn how to work around all that shit again.
And in that instance, you have to just, I don't know how to explain it. You have to look at them as though they were you, and you were going through this. And so you have to be kind. And there are times when people are aggressive toward you because they don't want you there. And you have to be fast. I think I did bring more of a female perspective, but I think I just sort of brought my perspective as well. And I do think that I had a different perspective because I was a mother, I was a wife, and I felt a kinship with people who were struggling. The reporter was known as a real bulldog, and we had been shooting out in East Texas. It was hot. It was mosquitoes the size of your hand. And at the end of the day, we had dinner, and we had a couple of drinks, and we were chatting and talking, and, life was good. Well, as we went back to our rooms at this hotel that we were staying at, he wanted to come into my room, and he wanted to continue our talking and laughing. And I said no, and he pushed me, and he pushed me into the room, and I pushed him back. And I thought we had agreed that, maybe there was just a misunderstanding. And he left. Well, when we got back to the station, and he reviewed all the video, and he wrote a memo saying how horrible it was, how unusable it was, how he couldn't do anything with this story. He did not ever want to work with me again. And I was devastated, and I was scared. I didn't know about sexual harassment. That was not a term that was happening back then. I was just afraid that I was going to be fired. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know who to tell, and I didn't know if I could tell anybody. So I didn't tell anyone. And it continued. And so I called other photographers in, and I had them look at some of this video. I said, did I miss something? Is this as bad as, and they all just said, no, there's nothing wrong with it. So as time went along, people would start coming to me and telling me that, boy, this guy really doesn't like you. He's bad-mouthing you. And he was telling other reporters, he was telling other photographers how awful I was. And I didn't know what to do, and I just wrote it out. And this went on for years. He didn't stop. He didn't stop. And I knew he had already asked that he not be put with me on a story, and that was great. And I think it was probably 5, 6 years, maybe even 8 years later, that we finally had to do a shoot together. And it was a New Year's Day. Nobody was in the newsroom. We got stuck together doing a Black Eyed Pea story. The yearly Black Eyed Pea story on New Year's Day. And we went to the Black Eyed Pea restaurant. I shot the story. We decided to eat. And I kept thinking, do I confront him about this? Do I ask him about this? And I decided not to. I just decided to ask him, how's your family? How are you doing? What's happening? And it just sort of went away. He stopped being so mean. But I had no idea that could happen in a newsroom or anywhere else. I don't even know what the going scale was back then. What was it, $6.75 an hour, maybe? I don't remember. So I stayed at the same rate for 2 years while I was a production assistant. So when I did move into the news department and started shooting, I got a bump of a raise. I thought, wow, this is great. All this fun and a raise too. And that went on for, 4 or 5 years, and then Paula Walker was hired, and she was a executive producer, I believe. And so one day Paula calls me into the office, and she says, I've been looking at the pay rate on everybody, and she says, you are way below what the men are making. And I said, oh, well, I didn't know. I didn't ever ask anybody what they made. And she said, we're gonna fix that. And she gave me a big bump. And it didn't put me in the highest range, but it didn't put me in the lowest range. And she said, you're just as good as they are. You get paid just as much as they do. There were several times in which I felt like my life was in danger. And one of them was at a club in which a rap group at the time, very popular rap group, was scheduled to play. It was over at the Longhorn Ballroom, and so we went over there, and we're waiting, and now we're about 3 hours past the time that they're supposed to come on stage. They get on the PA system and they announce that they are not going to perform until they get paid first. So people start yelling, pay them. And then the guy gets on, he says, see you later, suckers. And he leaves. And it was insane. People started picking up chairs, started throwing bottles, breaking everything. It was a packed room. And I was shooting just a big target there with a big old camera. Blood was starting to flow. And this man appeared out of nowhere and came over and got me and just said, you need to stay with me. And I said, okay, because I was really scared. And we went out this back door, and outside, people were destroying cars, and they were banging on news units. And I turned around to see where he was and to find him, and he was gone. And I started asking people where he was, and I described him, and nobody had seen anybody like that.
The Channel 8 helicopter was returning from Waco at just after 6 this evening, carrying videotape from this afternoon's Baylor, Texas game. Pilot Robbie Williams had radioed the TV station asking for ceiling and visibility information when suddenly the helicopter's radio went silent. A Waxahachie newspaper carrier in the area said he saw an orange fireball. He said there was a streak of light and the helicopter burst into flames, that there were 2 explosions. The 35-year-old pilot, Channel 8 News photographer Tom Cummings, 26, and Cummings' wife, Millicent, 34, were all pronounced dead at the scene.
We get a call on the two-way that tells us to head toward Waco. And they said the helicopters crashed. And we drove up to the scene. I got out, and there were body parts on the fence. And so I was walking around trying not to show anything like that. Also careful where I walked, and I was shaking really, really bad. And I went and got back in the news unit, and somebody came over and said, "I think she's in shock." And for years after that, I could not fly in the helicopter. And then one day, again, nobody was available, and Bert Shipp said, "Hey, Haas, you think you can handle it?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "It's time. I'll go back up." And when I got in there and I was up, all those parts just sort of flashed back, and I thought, I'm going to have a panic attack. And I didn't. But, you know, it was always a reminder that, you know, life can just be snatched away from you so quickly.
Oh, come on, all of you big strong men, Uncle Sam needs to help again. Got himself in a terrible jam way down yonder in Vietnam.
We ended up doing a series, 10 parts, called The War Within. Vietnam vets were having flashbacks, they were becoming alcoholics. Their lives were in shattered, you know, tatters. It was a look at Vietnam vets. It was a look at their lives, their families, their history, who served, women who served, who had been completely ignored. It was Arlington Cemetery, and you look out for miles of crosses, and you just realize the horrors of war. You understand what they went through even a little bit better. So it was a very emotional series, but I think it was really important, and I think it was. We actually were up for a national Emmy for that series, and it was one of the first times any local station had looked at that problem. And I remember in shooting that, you had to be very respectful of people. This was a very emotional time, and so it was important not just to be there with a camera, but to talk and be a friend and be somebody they could trust, because that was going to be very important. Could they trust us with the story? We did a follow-up story one time on one of the Vietnam veterans named Keith. We kind of wanted to see how he was doing after a couple of years, I think. So we go to his house, and Keith had become quite determined that he was going to always be able to protect the people around him, and that it was important that he taught the people around him how to protect themselves, because during his time in Vietnam, a very good friend of his was stabbed to death in front of him by Viet Cong, and it truly traumatized him. So he would get up in the morning and he would run. One of the things that he would do is he had knives that he would throw at a tree, and they were symbolic of getting back at this man who took his friend. But he also had this little boy, this little blonde-haired boy, about 5 or 6 years old, that he was teaching how to be a killing machine.
That's right. Now what? Let go of the hand, stop on the neck with that leg. That's right.
But the visuals were disturbing, to say the least. So we went into the house. The TV was on, cartoons were playing. And this little boy was kind of trying to watch cartoons. He kept glancing over and looking at the cartoons. And his father was saying, "This is how you put somebody's eyes out when they attacked you." And he would take his thumbs, he'd take the little boy's thumbs and he'd put them on his eyes. And he'd say, "Push, push, you can push their eyes out." And then he would say things like, "I want you to kick me in the stomach. Now kick me. really kick me hard. And little boy would be kicking a little, and he'd go harder, harder until you heard him grunt.
That's it, right there. You got it now.
And he said, I know that my neighbors think I'm crazy. He said, I know that, they think I'm trying to turn my little boy into a killing machine, but I'm not. And meanwhile, cartoons are going on in the background. And, you just think, this is where this child mind wants to be. He wants to be a child.
The North Sea thunders into the coast of Scotland. Bitterly cold, violent, and rich.
Scott Pelley and I did several stories together that were really exciting. One of them was about the oil market at that time. And one of the places that they get oil is the North Sea. And so we were going to fly out into the North Sea in March to shoot on these rigs. They tell us all about, we're going to get on this helicopter and we're going to go out to this rig, and you're going to have to put this wetsuit on. And that gives you about 20 seconds more to live if the helicopter goes down in the North Sea, because it's so cold. And I thought, oh, well, great. That'll help. It's like the Michelin Man. I mean, you were stuffed in there. So we get on the helicopter. We fly out over the North Sea. It's foggy. We're coming down fast. We're coming down faster and faster. We're going down through the clouds. We tip out of the clouds, and we are just about 3 feet above these raging waves in the ocean. And we glide right through that, go back up, and we find the oil rig and we land. And one of the things that I have to do while I'm there is climb up one of these oil rigs. And it's only enough space for one person. It's like a little catwalk, goes all the way to the top. And I had to take the deck and the tripod and the camera, and I carried it up, and I got up to the very top where you can just see forever. And I started shooting down into the rig and the water and the pipe coming up and going out. And it was pretty mesmerizing.
Please don't.
Do you have vitals on this woman?
Randy World on the front desk.
Scott and I did a documentary about what it costs for a county hospital to provide care for the indigent and what it's like to work in a hospital like that. And it was called The Price of Mercy. It was a frantic environment. In shooting in something like that, we were given complete and total access. Nobody said, you can't go here and you can't go there and you can't get this close or anything. So when we were shooting the emergency room, people were coming in from car wrecks, people were coming in from gunshot wounds. When we were at labor and delivery, it was so full that women were giving birth out in the hall. The burn unit was the hardest thing I think I ever shot. There was a 9-year-old boy named Kedrick Jordan. He was brought in. His whole family, except for his grandmother, was burned in a house fire. That documentary was one of the best pieces of work I've ever done. I think probably everybody that has worked in journalism and TV news has regrets. I think most of them have to do with the time you spent away from your family, the time you spent away from your loved ones, the enormous amount of energy that you had to give to feed this machine. I think, those are the times that you can't go back and change. The time that somebody else lost your company or your, care. So everybody was asked to do that. And, when you're 73 instead of 37, you can see that that was hard on the people that loved you. Well, I would say to any woman or any man that wants to be a journalist or wants to be a photojournalist, wants to be an editor, wants to be a producer, wants to work in news, that you better have a real clear understanding of what you want to accomplish. And you had better be open to the experience of people who have been there long before you. But I think it's still an exciting occupation, career, but I think it's such an important one. And it's going to be a battle. And you have to decide, do you want to be a commentator? Do you want it to be all about your opinion? Do you want to just be on TV? Or do you want to find the truth, and do you want to give people the facts? And do you want to do something that you can be really proud of? I was young and I was healthy and I was excited, and I created a career that I was proud of, and I made lots of good friends that are still friends these days, But I don't miss being there anymore. I look at the news and I see what's happening, and the state of journalism, the state of the country, and it's a battle right now over, good and evil. And I don't miss that. I was able to do a lot of different jobs. I started from being a PA to being a photojournalist to being a field producer to winning awards. So there's so many things that I was able to do. And because I had this job, because I had this dream, literally, my life changed forever. And it opened up my world far beyond what, it would have ever been. So it was a good time. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times, but it was mostly the best of times.